Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew White, and I'm the CEO and founder of Transcend Space. And I'm here to be talking about all things leadership thresholds.
And I'm Andy Rumbles. I am the founder of Arc Consulting and have the privilege of being a partner in Transcend Space. And I'm delighted that on this sunny day, I think we're going to have an energy-focused conversation. So I'm looking forward to this, Andrew.
We are. So let's just introduce what we're going to do here. We are focusing on leadership thresholds. I've identified these coming from my coaching work, that coaching wasn't just about personal development, it was about strategy. And I think you've identified them coming out of consulting, that it's not just about the deck, it's not just about the what. We've written a book on this. This book's going to be coming out in November. But what we wanted to do here was really put out into the world some of the conversations we're having, some of the things we're noticing, some of the contemporary events that companies are going through. So what we're going to do is this. Each week, one of us is going to bring a contemporary theme, and it's going to speak to some of the content from the book, but it's going to be illustrated through a live case that's being reported in the media, or we might even bring something from our coaching and consulting work, and it's going to be very confidential. So you ready, Andy? I'm going to kick off with the
I
first
am
one.
very ready. Go for it.
Right.
Hit me with
Okay.
hit me with it. Hit me with it.
So I think most people will be familiar with the company BP. Used to be known as British Petroleum, been in the news this week. It's had a major shareholder meeting, a vote which it actually lost, which was about taking back or removing some of the standards it was working to around climate disclosure. And what was interesting for me was I think they've been at this threshold for
Mm,
decades. I went back and did a little bit of research, and I'll take you through a very, very quick history. So, CEO Lord John Brown, so he was running the company from 1995 to 2007, came up with the kind of the purpose beyond petroleum. This was a speech that publicly acknowledged climate change back in 1997. If I'm honest, I think it was largely reputational. They did a few
mhm.
investments in solar and other renewables, and they introduced carbon pricing way ahead of their peers. So it was a movement in that direction. Tony Hayward came in, a bit of a retreat from that, pulling back. They had Deepwater
Mm.
Horizon, which exposed all kinds of issues with the company. Bob Dudley came in 2010, and that kind of moved them more into, I think, business as usual. Then came Bernard Looney, with an
Mm.
incredibly ambitious net zero pivot. They cut oil and gas production by about 40% initially. They scaled renewables. I think they attracted a lot of people. They put things out to shareholders. And so they became one of the most aggressive transitioning oil majors. So they were positioning themselves as an energy company. Then a reset and recalibration. Murray Achinloss came in 2024, focused back on the oil and gas business, selling off some of their sustainability. And more recently, a new CEO has come in, Meg O'Neill, with a further doubling down. But as we see, they can't let go of the green energy bit.
Mm.
They've got shareholders, and those shareholders, some of whom I think are activists, others are saying, right, the world is changing.
Mm.
And you might be making all this money out of oil and gas now, but are you going to be doing so in 10 years and
Mm.
20 years? And some of these are long-term investors. So for me, they're at this threshold. They're over it, they're
Mm.
back. They're over it, they're back. So anyway, that's the topic we're going to be talking about. What do you make of it? What do you see?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we were stimulated by this article, and if you were to look at it in a I guess at a surface level, you go, oh, this is a strategy question. This is like,
Yeah.
where is the greatest long-term value creation model? Is it doubling down on what we've already always known, or is it taking this more higher risk, but perhaps shorter term, less value accretive option of going into renewables? But really, they're at an identity crisis. This is an organization that doesn't know whether it is an oil major, a green company, or some sort of hybrid or transition.
Yeah.
And when you think about Lord Brown back in 97, they started to cross like a purpose threshold. They started to kind
Yep.
of begin to say that we recognize that two things are true, that there is going to be a demand decline for hydrocarbons in the future. That is an inevitability. And when you see what's going on geopolitically, even if you don't believe in climate change, just for energy security reasons, the world is going to move more and more away from hydrocarbons and being reliant on perhaps more geopolitically unstable parts of the world. So you know that that's coming. You also know that in your heart that there is a force for good component in the world. There are stakeholders now who want to see more from you than things that are exploitative and consumptive. So they started to kind of cross this threshold. But what they didn't start to get into is, what does the system incentives tell you about what really matters? And actually, whilst they started to cross in terms of their culture, in terms of what people expected of them, they hadn't figured out the story they needed to let go of and start to help people come with them on that journey. So every time they get so far, they snap back. And, we often talk about being in a liminal space. You have to sit in that in-between space and figure these things out and bring people with you, and not just your shareholders, but also your people, your system incentives, and so forth. So for me, it's a fascinating story about an organization that has seen a glimpse of a future identity of what it can become, but it hasn't had the ability to connect narrative to stakeholder deep shift. And more importantly, how does it get into some of those system incentives? And we see it all the time in our organizations. We often talk about the say do gap. I say this, but then I do something else. That is deeply prevalent through this story, I think. I mean, what do you
Yeah.
think, Andrew? I mean,
I
does that
mean,
resonate with you? What do you think?
yeah, very much so. I mean, I think you can look at it as a strategy question. I think it is. It's like, where do
Yeah.
we invest capital? But also it's a purpose threshold. Who
Mm.
are we? Are
Yeah.
we an energy company or are we an oil and gas company? Um, it's got a big systemic question to it because,
Mm.
as we see at the moment, we're right in the middle of the Iran war. Oil prices are going
Mm.
up. Sales of EVs, interestingly, were going down. I think now they've
Mm.
started to go up again. Um, so I think the world is at a threshold around this stuff, and it
Mm.
it accelerates, it slows down, it
Yeah.
goes. But I think the long-term trajectory is clearly going in one direction. Um, and I think you said something. Almost they need to learn to play two games. And you can only
Yes.
play two games if you have a higher truth about who we are. Um,
Mm.
and I'm struck when I was preparing for this. I did a case study in Volvo Trucks as part of the work I
Mm.
did on transformation, and I think they play out a different way of approaching this. Some of the biggest trucks in the world consume a lot of diesel, and they created a production line which simultaneously could put a battery pack in to a truck and then a internal combustion engine. What it gave them was the ability to play this game. They could ramp up one, they could, ramp down the other. They could then flip. Because they didn't
Mm.
know how it was going to play out. They didn't know the timing of how it would play out. So I think they've actually got something right around this. It's like
Mm.
playing two games. Yes, one isn't going to perform well as the other financially today. I don't think
Mm.
that's the question, right? I
No.
think the question is, are you going to be here in 30 years' time? And are you building the footprint? Are you building the capabilities? Are you learning? You've got to measure these things differently. And that's just really, really hard, I think. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Yeah, it's that concept we used to call the ambidextrous organization. Like, how
Yeah,
do you hold two distinct, let's say, value creation thesis and potential opportunities, but each of those has their own culture, their own systems, their own incentives. But as you say, if they're not aligned to a higher truth, essentially what you're creating is a tension and a friction.
yeah,
And those organizations that can confront that reality, who actually spend time not just thinking about it in the rational sense, but actually surfacing the assumptions and what the world is calling them to do, are the ones that can find ways that might, on the surface be seem like they're in conflict or even contrasting with each other. But actually, as you say, it's about not just being here in 30 years and creating value in 30 years, but it's also about being relevant in 30 years. Like, how do you actually show up in a way that the world needs you to do, that your consumers find relevant and your investors and other kind of stakeholders do? So I think BP is a great example of a worthy, brilliant organization with a storied heritage that found itself at a moment where it recognized, it glimpsed that future, but because it didn't take the time to pause and sit with what does this new identity really mean, and how do we manifest this new idea, this new narrative, not just into our system, our incentives, etc., but how do we make some hard choices? We can't bring everybody with us. We can't bring all of our shareholders with us. We can't bring all of our people with us. Some of our customers may need to shift. But because they didn't sit in that space long enough, I think we find ourselves in this sort of leadership churn, hard reset churn that is almost a distraction from true transformation. It's sort of shuffling the deck chairs, but the core identity and the core culture doesn't shift.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really interesting time for this organization to say, if it doesn't sit in that space and spend time confronting that identity, we may be back here again in another year or two.
Yeah, I suspect they might, and maybe for different reasons. It might not be the
Yes.
climate, it might be resilience. Um,
Yes.
and that might be changing. It might be consumer behavior that's changing. I'm struck as well. It's interesting you bring up the ambidextrous organization. I'm struck by another idea
Mm,
that's been around for a long time, which is Clay Christensen's stuff on disruption.
mm,
And I remember what he said was that the new always really it doesn't hit the metrics of the old. Um,
yes.
and it doesn't create the returns. So it's always slightly underperforming, sometimes majorly underperforming. But if you look at it on the S curve, it's got far more upside potential. And I think that's what could be playing out here as well. And I'm also struck by just a more prosaic thing, right? I thought markets were meant to make cheaper solutions, and actually, markets were meant to create efficiencies, lower costs, and we've got this with renewables, right?
Yeah.
And yet somehow oil and gas, you make more money and you stay on that, but like the whole purpose of a business is to create and compete through efficiency and a lower
Mm,
cost solution. um,
mm,
so it's that bit seems a bit odd to me, because ultimately the lower cost is always gonna win. And the that's what because that's what consumers will take. And I think at some point, I don't know that much about energy markets, but in the
mm,
UK, our energy is priced on gas. And but at some point, there's going to be I think it's going to tip, and the benefit of lower cost renewables will kick in. Um, and so you've got there's some dynamics here playing out way outside the company in terms of energy markets, resilience, and these types of things.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, they always used to say that, one of the key drivers of automation beyond obviously technology evolution was the price of labor. Labor goes up, more automation happens. When labor goes down, automation and stops. And on the renewable side, a lot of the capital infrastructure needed to allow consumers to take advantage of that lower price production hasn't always been there. If anyone drives an EV, it's not always a convenient charging station. Solar panels
Yeah,
still require a capital up front. But if the oil price keeps skyrocketing and staying, and being highly volatile, if parts of the world become more and more inaccessible, as the price of labor in my labor automation story goes up, then the markets will correct, and suddenly it will move, and it can move very fast, and
yeah,
you can find yourself on the wrong side of that equation. And I remember talking to Shell's, horizon scanning team, and they were working to a 50-year time horizon because of their capital investment strategy. That is a big duration for an organization that now needs to make some agile movements. And can you really afford right now to double down on the old world when everything tells us the pace of change is accelerating? Um,
exactly. Yeah. So what do you do? It's easy for us to sit here and talk about this. Um, I think what we're trying to figure out is how do you transition these things. Um, so we've come up with a process that we've observed, right? You've got
Yes.
to start by bringing things into awareness. And we've done several workshops with exec teams where we brought things into awareness. It's not easy because you don't just have these complex systemic things. You've got complex histories, you've got strategies that were in place, embedded. You've also got people and people's fears and anxieties. And so we know that you've got to get all of that out on the table, you know. So there's an awareness piece. That at some point leads to an action piece. And what we know is that the actions probably won't get achieved, right? Because
Mm,
you're working against the status quo. So there's then something around the accountability, and we're going to have to take two or three turns at this. But
mm,
what we also know is, and this is the bit I think I personally find most exciting, is that there are accelerators.
mm.
There are things that you can do that have a disproportionate impact in getting you across that threshold. Um, we've seen a few of them. I don't think we're in a position yet to fully define it, so we'll leave that to future episodes. Um, but we know there's almost like three steps, and then there's this other thing.
Yeah.
Um, and we're working on this. And so,
Mm.
how do you see this kind of manifesting in an organization? Um, I'm bringing a coaching piece. You're bringing a consulting strategy piece. What we've realized is there's a wonderful marriage between those two things. Um, and this is how it shows up.
Yeah, and I think that's been, not to self-congratulate ourselves, but actually the marriage, as we were saying the other day to a client, the marriage of understanding that inner shift that's required, which often comes through the kind of the coaching and the more kind of intimate work, maybe one-to-one with leaders, and that outer shift, which is, I guess, where consulting spends most of its time, which is the more structural kind of components of what does it really take to do these things. You cannot live one without the other. So
No,
when you're doing all those three stages before we come to accelerators, actually it's the marriage of that inner and outer at the awareness stage, at the action and the accountability that has proven to allow organizations to make the real shift. So on that awareness front, yes, all of the things, all of those conversations that they keep circling on and never resolve, all of those issues that they know they need to talk about that they simply don't, or where, and I love your question around this, where do we need greater unity on things?
yeah,
That kind of inner narrative you have to create space for this. You can't do this in the course of normal business. You have to say it is worthy of us pausing, and not pausing in a paralytic sense, but taking time to sit in this space and hold it and explore it, because it's the things that are holding us back. It's the friction in the system. But likewise, you need, as we found, when it's most powerful is when there's a mandate, when there's an external stimulus or even an internal driven one, but there has to be something. But the challenge is often many organizations, you'll say, this is the challenge facing you. And they'll say, yeah, 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 yeah. But actually, they don't come together to all align around that. So they're not working to the same problem. And even in my strategy work for years, I've spent time with organizations saying, have you actually crystallized what the real reality is that you're facing? Because you're coming up with wonderful ideas, but it's not anchored in the reality of where you are right now and what it is that you need to face and challenge. So spending that time together is really important. And then I think the second thing that we've seen work really well is you can't outsource this work to people as a leader. You can't go, this is something I'm going to delegate to N minus two, N minus three, right? It's not going to get done for you. So you have to create the space. We often call them containers, or we use coaching tools, but it's the ability to put leaders into doing the real work and working with them in real situations, helping them make different decisions and different outcomes and build habits and new incentives and new systems together that they can then lead authentically through organizations. And that's where your accountability thing comes in, because If we don't keep the cadence, the discipline around this, this is where you see with the BPs, people start to flow back, is because when things get hard, like the next quarter is not as good as it was the prior time, people naturally start to lose their nerve and start to walk back. So how do you embed that accountability into the organization? I think that's where we've been spending a lot of time with clients, is helping them understand how to hold the nerve, how to keep true to the path. So to me, that's what we've been doing with organizations. And you can see the relief in people's eyes when they can finally have the conversations that they need to have, and that they finally have a coherence and a clarity that they can take not just to themselves and their leadership team, but they can take back to the organization and to the outside world, and give people confidence that they know where they're going.
Yeah. I mean, I think as you're talking, it brought to mind a situation that we both witnessed recently, where there was just brutal, brutal honesty. It was
Mm,
hard. It was uncomfortable. There was a lot of emotion. There was some tears. There was some raised voices. There were some really uncomfortable messages. But something changed as a result of it. So I
mm,
think there's something which is about the inner.
mm,
And let's just pivot back to BP. You know, I'm going to hypothesize something here that
mm,
in the absence of what you described, a significant moment in the outer environment, and I think we'll get there. I think something will change. You know, we're in such an unstable environment where the
mm.
need for them to transition will come back.
Yeah.
I think this time it's going to have a commercial reality to it. Um, in the absence of that, you know, they need an accelerator. They need something
Mm,
which is so attractive on the other side of that threshold, that is so embodied. It's real. It's not some deck. It's not a purpose statement.
mm,
It's not. Has a business reality to it. And it may be that some of these renewable businesses need to start to scale, need to create value in a different
mm,
way, get some economies of scale around them, and they start to see what that looks like. And it forces them to become the energy company that I think they probably need to be, and recognize. Now, the question is going to be: have things moved so much that even an organization with that much brand capital, you know, it's easy to think of companies like that as being invincible, and they're actually not.
yeah.
You know, in their sector, Enron went down
Mm,
for different reasons.
mm.
We've seen a whole host of different businesses fail because they didn't move quick enough. Um, so this is going to be an interesting one, Andy. I suspect this has got more to play out.
Agreed. And it's like, do they want, staying in the energy space? Tesla is now, one of the most highest market cap automobile companies in the
Yes,
world. Came out of nowhere, makes less
yes,
cars than most of its competitors,
yes,
yet is worth more. And now
yes,
all of the competition is racing to keep up.
yeah,
So do they want a Tesla entering their environment? Or if we take Nvidia, Nvidia made graphics chips, and then you know they decided that they saw the AI wave coming before everyone else, and they reinvented themselves as an AI chip company. And obviously, there were some adjacencies from the sorts of capabilities and tools that they had, but they were an existing industry player like BP is. They saw the wave and they pivoted and they moved
yeah,
fast.
yeah,
So
yeah,
do
yeah,
they want to be an Nvidia, or do they want to be a General Motors? And I think that's an interesting question, because Nvidia did not see the returns for a number of years, and
yeah.
then when it came, it just. So
Yeah.
I think that would be my question to them right now. Do they want to be an
And
Nvidia or a
yeah.
General Motors?
And for me, what's interesting is what was it in NVIDIA that created the accelerators, you know?
Mm,
And so if anyone out there listening has got any insights, drop it in the comments on wherever this is. You
please.
see this on LinkedIn or Spotify. We'd love to know more about what actually helped them accelerate. It's easy to see the output, the share price, where
Yeah.
they are now. But what we need to understand exactly what made them speed up, what gave huge incentives, progress, that got them across that threshold. So the first one done, Andy.
Brilliant.
Your turn next, my friend.
No,
So yeah, so like
thank you
you
for
got
that.
to,
I will no, but I will come with an even better story. I'm
yeah, get
committing to
stuck
that.
into the
So
FT. I'm sure that
I
these
will be
things are
reading the
happening left, right.
FT. I will be reading the Guardian. I'll be reading everything. I'll see, and
Yeah,
I will
yeah, yeah,
come. I will
yeah.
come with a better one. But yeah, this was a great one to start us off. Thank you, Andrew.
Very good. Thank you, everybody, and we will be back with another episode very shortly.